So that was a test run.
Okay. All right, it's good practice.
It won't make you too nervous.
All right, ready? All right, call to order the James City County Wetlands Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to preserve the wetlands and to accommodate economic activity so as to prevent their despoliation. Can I have a roll call?
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Waltrip? Mr. O'Brien?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here. All right, everyone's had an opportunity to review the minutes. Are there any changes or amendments?
Yes, sir.
Minutes stand. There are no public hearings tonight. Board considerations. We need to elect a new chairman.
Dunn, would you accept the nomination?
I will accept the nomination. Do we need a second, or is that?
Sure.
Second it.
And I accept. Then a second
We
point.
can do roll call. So nomination on the board, on the floor for Mr. Dunn as chair. We'll also need a vice chair, please. If somebody would like to make a nomination.
We nominate Mr. Lukens for being absent.
Well done. I second.
Thank you. We have Mr. Dunn as chair, Mr. Lukens as vice chair, Mr. Roadley,
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mr. Dunn.
Yes.
Thank you.
That concludes board considerations, matters of special privilege. We have an update on the living shoreline for 8797 Pocahontas Trail.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, James City County Watershed Planner, here to give an update on a construction project going on at 8797 Pocahontas Trail. Before we get into that, I do want to welcome Mr. Lukens to being a full-time member of this board, and also introduce Mr. Scott May, who is here with us this evening as a new alternate to this board. So this project came before the board to gain approval early in 2021. And the gist of the project is a series of breakwaters to prevent further erosion that was occurring along about a 1 to 2 mile stretch of shoreline. So what you'll see in this presentation is a brief site plan to make everyone aware of what the project had proposed, and then a series of construction photos that were taken approximately each week over the past 3 to 4-ish months. The PowerPoint is set up as a slideshow, so it will just run concurrently, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys have after it is done. As you can see in a lot of these photos, more material was brought in as the project went along. So they started construction, created the breakwater system and tombolos and beach nourishment, and then came back through and added more sand and more rocks throughout the project.
Trevor, how far channelward of mean low water were those breakwaters installed? I just don't recall.
Off the top of my head, I can't recall either, but that is something that I can
I was
get
just
the answers
curious.
back to you on.
I was saying, been dredging out there in the river. Is part of that dredging sand used for this, or is that?
I do not believe so. I believe the sand and the rock for this project came from Maryland.
They leaving in those existing poles and
I believe those are actually just part of the construction of the actual breakwaters, and they will likely be removed after it's complete. There is an area that will have a pier on it, but it is adjacent to the breakwater system. All right.
When will it be completed?
I think I just restarted. I believe their timeline is to shoot for completion around June, so a couple months out. So they seem to be going through a linear phasing, going down the beach and then multiple times coming back through, adding more rock as things settle, and then getting to the correct height, and then adding sand as it's needed.
they're going to fill in with some plants, the sand area.
There is, in certain sections, I believe there was some marsh grasses that were intended to be planted. And there's certainly, in the areas that any grading occurred, they were required to replant with riparian mixes.
I don't have any pictures of the grading, do you? I remember there was one slope that was like, well, it was a cliff.
Yeah, and a lot of those cliffs were actually going to remain as they are because there was artifacts or historical issues with trying to grade those sections back. So they weren't able to pull any of those slopes back to a stable grade. There is a photo, and it's very difficult to see because it was a subsection of the project that was not easy to get to. It's possible I don't have a good one to show, but there's only one section of actual shoreline revetment that was associated with the grading.
Ask a question. Those high sheer banks like that, do they have signs down there that to warn the kids or and stuff like cave in, or whether that's being done or not?
They don't have any signs for the dangers of the bank, and I think a lot of that has to do with the private nature of the property. I believe they do deal with trespassers out there, but I don't believe there are any
You're talking
warning.
about Carter's Grove.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Waltrip, there are signs on the property that it is private and no trespassing allowed.
My question was from water.
Yes, they're on the beach.
Yeah, that's what my question was.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, looks good.
Mr. Long? All right. If there's no other matters of special privilege, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Meeting is adjourned. Now, Call to order the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Roll call, please.
Mr. Roadley,
Here.
Mr. Waltrip,
Here.
Mr. O'Brien,
Here.
Mr. Dunn.
Here. Everyone's had a chance to review the minutes. Any changes?
No corrections or additions.
Minutes stand. And now for public hearings. But first, the outline of tonight's public hearings will be a staff presentation followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. Then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. After everyone wishing to speak have done so, the public hearing will be closed and discussion amongst the board members will start. The first case is 500 Thompson Lane, presentation by Mr. Long.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, James City County Watershed Planner, here presents CBPA 22-0010. Mr. Nathaniel Thompson has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the demolition and construction of a single-family dwelling with an attached garage, patio, 2 decks, and retaining walls on property located at 500 Thompson Lane. The parcel was platted in 1982, prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size of this property is 34.93 acres, of which 99% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing to demolish the existing home and garage to construct a new single-family residence with a garage, patio, 2 decks, and retaining walls. This plan was previously approved on July 20th, 2018, and extended on August 14th, 2019. However, the approval has since expired. It's for this reason that the plan is being heard before the board tonight again. This plan has been adjusted to meet the conditions set forth in the revised ordinance for retaining walls. Other than those changes, the plan is as was approved. The existing home and garage equate to approximately 1,505 square feet of impacts to the RPA. Total new impervious cover for the proposed construction equates to approximately 2,203 square feet to the landward 50-foot RPA and 1,576 square feet to the seaward 50-foot RPA. This construction will also require the installation of multiple retaining walls around the garage portion. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 10 planting units, which is 10 canopy trees, 20 understory trees, and 30 shrubs. The applicant has also proposed to allow approximately 3,000 square feet of maintained lawn adjacent to the existing wetlands on property to naturally revegetate, which will count towards the applicant's mitigation. Total mitigation requirements include the revegetation of the previously maintained area and installation of 7 planting units, which is 7 canopy trees, 14 understory trees, and 21 shrubs. The applicants have also proposed to enroll in the Turf Love program in addition to using gravel under the deck to mitigate stormwater runoff. Under the previous plan, the applicant paid a $3,000 surety, therefore no surety will be required for this application. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the demolition and construction of a single-family dwelling with an attached garage, patio, 2 decks, and retaining walls. The application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because some of the proposed construction is considered accessory in nature and there is an expansion of non-conforming structure. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not a substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be major for the proposed development. Staff does recommend approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project, including a building permit if necessary. The submittal of a mitigation plan equating to 7 planting units, 7 canopy trees, 14 understory trees, and 21 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. The revegetation of approximately 3,000 square feet of previously maintained lawn area. That this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by March 9th, 2023, and that written requests for an extension to this exception be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than January 26, 2023, just 6 weeks prior to this expiration date. Thank you. I'll now divert your attention to your screens for a brief presentation. Again, the applicant's request is to construct a single-family dwelling with a garage, patio, 2 decks, and retaining walls around the garage area. The vicinity map of the property outlined here in blue. Again, the property address is 500 Thompson Lane. An aerial photograph of the area of the property where the proposed encroachments will be occurring. The existing house is located here, and the garage being located here. Topography as it affects this property, the actual lot itself is very flat on many portions and slopes up to the middle where the house sits. And the resource protection area as it affects this property, as I said, about 99% of this property is located within the resource protection area, with the one section that is outside of the RPA being located in the very center. The floodplain as it affects this property, and the site plan of which has been submitted. The 100-foot resource protection area being this red dashed line in the center, and the 50-foot resource protection area being this dashed line. The proposed residence is located here in yellow, or at least the portion that will be encroaching into the resource protection area. The plan for this project is to join both the garage and the house together, and the retaining walls located around the garage occur in a series of terracing on the northern side of the garage and then on the eastern side extending out here. This green area here is the proposed revegetation area, which is approximately 3,000 square feet. It had been previously maintained lawn area directly adjacent to the wetlands, and the applicant has proposed to allow that to revegetate into a natural manner. This is the previously approved site plan. Again, the RPA being the red dashed line here, and the general plan being almost identical. The changes that occurred are shown here in this red area. There were more retaining walls that had to be added on the northern side of this property to meet new ordinance conditions that were set forth in the time between these two applications. Some site photographs. We are probably in the one area that is outside of the RPA in this section of the property. This retaining wall will be staying, and this is the house that they plan to demolish and reconstruct. Looking back towards the front of the property, towards the side, this is the garage that currently exists, and as I was saying, they do plan to join the garage to the existing, or to the house, and the new house. This is the area that will be affected by the retaining walls. So there will be a series of retaining walls going down this slope. There are currently existing retaining walls on this property that are beginning to fail, and the timber wall is beginning to rot out and in need of replacement as well. Again, staff does recommend approval of this exception request with the following 5 conditions: that all other necessary local, state, and/or federal permits are required, that a mitigation plan of 7 canopy trees, 14 understory trees, and 21 shrubs be submitted, that the revegetation of approximately 3,000 square feet of previously maintained lawn area is implemented and stays. This permit condition should be struck. This surety has already been paid, and that this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by March 9th, 2023, with written requests for an extension to be submitted no later than January 26, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you will have at this time.
It's the same piece of property that had the solar panels put in?
Yes, sir, I do believe there are solar panels put in. I will defer that to the applicant to confirm, however.
Trevor, given that we're hearing this because of the lapse in the permit, does this give them sufficient time to get started?
I believe it should, and I will let the applicants discuss any reasons why they weren't able to, and if they feel like this would be an appropriate amount of time.
The salt trees are either creosoted, looks like 8x8 piles of, wall. They're gonna be put back in the same location, or are you moving those out?
Portions of it will go back into the same location. There are sections that will have additional walls to it to create a terracing effect sloping down the property.
For the new revetment of retaining walls, are they going to be the timber, or are they going to be the aggregate?
They will be stone. I will let the applicant expand on that as far as materials. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll open a public hearing. Any applicants, the applicant wishes to come forward and speak, please state your name and address, sir.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Nathaniel Thompson. I go by Ross. I'm accompanied by my wife here tonight. I appreciate your consideration of this application for a second time. We got delayed in the construction. We thought we were going to move ahead back in 2018, but we got delayed in various reasons. But to answer one of the questions, we're ready to get started to the point that I'm ready to sign a contract with a builder, going through this permitting process, and the actual construction of the house and garage is sitting before the building permit section of James City County, waiting to be approved. So I don't think there's going to be any further delay. I don't think I'll be back next year to extend this a second time. But you asked a question about solar panels. We are planning on putting solar panels on the property, but not currently not on the roof of the buildings, but ground-mounted solar panels that will be not making any impervious cover to the existing property. So, and the question about the retaining walls, the basically railroad ties, creosote, wood retaining walls are going to all come out and be replaced by stone retaining walls. They were never built to code. They're dilapidated, and as Trevor pointed out, this property is very unique from the standpoint that it's Warburton's Pond is is the 25 acres that sits in front of where the house is. Gordon's Creek surrounds in the back. There's only one place you can build on this property, and that's to take down the existing structure and put up new. And the space between the existing house and the current garage is basically going to be filled in with the new construction of the house and the garage, and they'll be connected together. So the footprint of the house really hasn't changed at all since the initial application. What did change is we changed some of the interior design of the building and took out a 1,600 square foot apartment above the garage because it was unnecessary for our use as we reevaluated it. And with the cost increase in construction materials, it was a trade-off to fit within the budget. I guess the one last point is on the retaining walls itself. You would have to replace the existing retaining walls that are there now to do the construction, to do the proper foundation and the footings, et cetera. When the new ordinance came out, which was subsequent to the previous approval, you would have had to put somewhere between a 6 and an 8 foot retaining wall in there, which required a separate engineering permit. We took a step back, had an engineer come out, look at it. Suggestion was just do smaller 3 foot retaining walls, so there'll be a series of those so that we don't have to get an engineering separate permit and also create the terraced effect back there, which I think will kind of blend in nicely with the existing property. Subject to any questions?
Sir, is there also, wasn't there also an expansion of an office, like attached to the shed or attached to the barn?
So our long-term, we used to own a second home in Northern Virginia, which we don't own anymore. We sold it in the end of last year. So last year, which is really the main reason for the delay, we went through the permitting process and put a small apartment on the barn. And there's a small office in what used to be a storage room on there. So we spent some money and time last year, and that's when the house comes down. That's where my wife and I will live for the time of the construction and then move back into the new house. So that was a completely separate permitting process with the resource protection area, Virginia Department of Health, et cetera, et cetera. When we did that project, we also put in, with all the approvals through VDH, the septic system that handles both the barn and the small apartment. And then when the house is built, that septic system will just connect to the new house. So that's already been done.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on this matter? Not. The public hearing is closed and board deliberations. I was not here for the first time this was approved. This is a significant expansion, more than doubling of the impacts. Anybody from the previous, the previous deliberations?
I don't recall the specifics of the deliberation, but I think the comments were made, given when this lot was platted in its previous use, and was this a reasonable accommodation? There's no real way other than reducing the size of the house to reduce the encroachment. You can't move it any further out of the RPA buffer.
Yeah.
The retaining walls and the infiltration that helped create behind those walls, I think is perhaps partly why I supported the application previously. And so I'm, even though there is a significant encroachment, I think that at the end, the project won't contribute any more sediment-laden runoff to the surrounding wetlands or waterway. So I think that's partly why I supported it previously.
Well, it's a nice piece of property there. It's enough land there to make and do what he wants to do, I feel, and the taxes on it, and I don't think it's gonna be that much encroachment on that RPA that's gonna hurt anybody, and, I would definitely support.
Okay, if there, anybody else like to speak? If not, then we'll go ahead and,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 22-0010.
We have a motion to adopt the resolution. Mr. Roadley,
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mr. Dunn.
yes.
Motion passes.
The next presentation, Ms. Benedict for 1584 Harbor Road.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Robin Benedict. I'm a watershed planner with James City County, presenting CBPA 22-0004. Ms. Christy Bruning of Custom Gardens has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the replacement of an existing patio with permeable pavers and artificial turf on property located at 1584 Harbor Road within the Governor's Land subdivision and the Gordon Creek watershed. The parcel was platted in 1994 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The total lot size of this property is 0.3 acres, of which 60% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing to replace the existing 167 square foot patio to the rear of the existing house with permeable pavers and artificial turf, equating to approximately 803 square feet of new impacts in the seaward 50-foot RPA. This project will also encroach on conservation easement located behind the house. Required mitigation of this amount of impervious impacts to the RPA equals the planting of 2 planting units, 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs. The applicant has proposed to plant 2 understory trees and 71 shrubs, therefore exceeding county mitigation requirements. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the replacement of the existing patio with permeable pavers and artificial turf. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the installation of permeable pavers and artificial turf is considered accessory in nature and the filter media constructed underneath the turf is a compacted gravel. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation, of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be moderate for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The plantings of 2 understory trees and 71 shrubs be completed, as well as a surety for $3,750 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee these mitigation plantings. All runoff generated by the permeable paver patio and artificial turf areas shall utilize the existing drainage structures to direct these flows into the existing BMP. No runoff shall be directed towards the marina. This exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by March 9th, 2023, with any written request for an extension to the exception submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than January 26th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. You turn your attention to the screen for a short presentation. Again, this is CBPA 22-0004 at 1584 Harbor Road for the replacement of the existing patio with permeable pavers and artificial turf. Here in light blue, you can see the subject parcel. Again, this is in the Governor's Land subdivision. The project location at the rear of the house. Topography at the site, which is fairly flat. The RPA, as it affects this lot, it goes all the way up to about the front of the house. And the conservation easement, which comes up to the back of the house. The floodplain, as it affects this lot. And the location of the existing BMP across the street from this lot. Here's the submitted site plan with the 100-foot and 50-foot resource protection areas, as well as the conservation easement along the back of the house. Here is the area of proposed artificial turf. This is the only area of artificial turf for this plan. And then the proposed paver patio, which includes this, this gridded area and these small blocks along each side of the house. Here's a cross-section of the artificial turf to be used, showing the compacted gravel, which is why we are considering the artificial turf to be an impervious cover. Site photograph, the area right in front of this is the area of the artificial turf. The existing patio, which is to be replaced. Again, staff recommends approval for this application given the following conditions. All other necessary local, state, and federal permits be acquired, as well as the planting of 2 understory trees and 71 shrubs. A surety of $3,750 to guarantee these plantings be submitted. All runoff generated will use the existing BMP. No runoff will be directed towards the marina. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction is not begun by March 9th, 2023, with written requests for an extension submitted no later than January 26th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration deadline. Thank you, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Benedict. All right, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Anyone like to speak on this matter, please come forward, state your name and address. Okay, then we'll close the public hearing. And for board discussions,
Mr. Chairman, just a question for staff. Given the conservation easement, do we have to take an official action on that, or is that just taking an action on the Ches Bay case and the conservation easement falls in place?
It's 2 separate issues, Mr. Roadley. The board's only concern is with the RPA. Conservation easement will be handled by staff.
I recall we've approved similar minor encroachments within this area, surrounding the harbor previously.
we have. I'm not a fan of the artificial turf. I don't like the idea of covering up the natural environment and putting that down over top of it. I just object to it.
That's for aesthetic reasons only, because it's a very small patch of it.
Can you show the site plan again, just for clarity? What is that patch to the right?
Where's the marina? Okay. The runoff is going south.
And just for clarity also, this really has nothing to do with this application, but didn't they just recently, relatively speaking, replace all of the bulkheading around the marina that was failed?
Ms. Benedict may not be aware of that project, but yes, they recently have rebulkheaded the entire marina and spent a couple dollars doing that in the floating docks and the fuel station and everything.
The reason for that was because the vinyl was failing and they were getting sediment
Correct. That
getting
the
through bulkhead.
the previous bulkhead had failed, partially due to hydrostatic pressure behind it, partially due to installation issues.
Gotcha. Just a little more context for what's going on there.
Thank you.
Just for information, didn't we approve a lot next to that with the turf?
Like last month or the month before, we did.
Yes, sir. Within the last 3 months, I would say, we did approve the adjacent neighboring property for a similar footprint of artificial turf entirely.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution to grant a exception for the Chesapeake Bay Board, CBPA -0 1880.
Yes.
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 No. Okay, third case tonight, Ms. Benedict will present for 2413 Sarah Spence.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Robin Benedict, James City County Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 22-0001. Mr. Lloyd Stevens Builder, has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Charles and Ms. Karen Lyon for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the extension of an existing deck, the construction of a new deck, and the construction of an external elevator shaft on property located at 2413 Sarah Spence Court within the Vineyard subdivision and the College Creek watershed. The parcel was platted in 1990 prior to the changes in the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 2004. The total lot size of this property is 0.78 acres, of which 77% is located within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to convert the existing deck and screened porch into a 100-square-foot sun space and construct a new 120-square-foot deck adjacent to the existing one. Encroachments from the existing structures and new structure will extend 4 feet further into the RPA than current on-site conditions. Additionally, the applicants have proposed to install a 40-square-foot external elevator shaft on the side of the existing home. In 2018, the applicants were granted an administrative approval to perform general woodlot management and create an access path to Lake Adjican. As part of this approval, the applicants provided a planting plan to include the future construction of a patio area and deck expansion. The approved mitigation plan included 3.5 planting units for the 1,375 square feet of proposed future impervious impacts. Total impacts to the RPA associated with the new proposal associated with this exemption request equate to 265 square feet in the landward 50-foot RPA. Required mitigation of this amount of impervious impacts equals 11 shrubs. Because the applicants have already planted mitigation for the previously approved and proposed expansion, no further mitigation is required for this exception request. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a deck. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a deck is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for this project, including a building permit if necessary. And this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by March 9th, 2023, with any written request for an extension submitted no later than January 26th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Now, if you'll turn your attention to the screen for a short presentation. Again, this is CBPA 22-0001 at 2413 Sarah Spence Court for the extension of the existing deck, the construction of a new deck, and the installation of an elevator shaft. Here is the subject parcel outlined in blue. Again, this is in the Vineyards subdivision. The project location, topography at the site, at the proposed construction site, it's fairly flat. The resource protection area as it affects this lot. And here is the proposed site plan with the 100-foot and 50-foot resource protection area. The proposed deck at the very corner is the new impervious cover, as well as the proposed deck expansion, which is 4 feet closer to the water than the existing screened porch and deck, and the proposed elevator shaft. So for this project, they will be combining the screened porch and the deck into one larger deck that has the small extension towards the water, as well as down these stairs, a new landing deck, and then the elevator shaft. Here is the previously approved mitigation plan with numerous plantings down at the water, which have been completed, so there is no planting requirements for this proposed project. Site conditions, this is where the new deck will be constructed. At the edge of the mulch, that is where the expansion will fall, again, 4 feet closer to the water. The back of the house as it currently stands with the screened porch and the existing deck. Again, staff recommends approval with the following conditions. All other necessary local, state, and federal permits, including a building permit, be acquired. And this exception request approval will become null and void if construction is not begun by March 9th, 2023, with any written request for an extension submitted no later than January 26th, 2023. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
So what's there now is removed and something completely new is of it?
Yes, all of that will be replaced.
This is a pedestrian elevator shaft, right?
I'm sorry?
This is a pedestrian elevator shaft for people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Any other questions for staff? All right, thank you, Ms. Benedict.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward? Evening, sir. Please state your name and address
Hi,
for the record.
my name is Lloyd Stevens. I live at 3252 North Riverside Drive in Lenexa. The only thing I want to clear up is the elevator shaft. I was asked by the homeowner to add it in. That is a project they want to do in the future, and they wanted to get it cleared with the Chesapeake Bay based on the meeting we sat and listened to tonight. I'm not sure that's going to be done prior to the expiration date of start of construction. We will start construction before, but the elevator shaft won't be in the current contract. So I just want to point that out. So I guess that's a question too. I guess we have to go before the Chesapeake Bay Board in the future if they want to do the elevator shaft. If it's beyond
If the board were to approve this plan with the elevator shaft on it, and the way the ordinance is written, is that the construction of the project has to start, not necessarily each individual piece of the project. So if they approve it with the elevator shaft on it, or the Lions, I should say, are grandfathered for that elevator shaft.
Okay, I just want to make sure and let you know that wasn't going to happen immediately. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to come forward and speak on this matter? If not, we'll close the public hearing. Board discussions.
Looking at the elevation of the house, the floor elevator shafts for as we get older are mighty nice, and see nothing wrong with that system. That to 'em.
Any other discussions? If not, can I have a nomination?
Motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board Case CBPA 22-0001, 2413 Sarah Spence.
We have a motion to adopt. Mr. Roadley,
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mr. Dunn.
Yes.
Motion passes.
That concludes our public hearings for tonight. There are no matters of special privilege. I can have a motion to adjourn.
So move.
I'd like to thank the board members and staff for making this meeting happen tonight. Meeting adjourned.